y'all. I think we can go ahead and get started. Just a quick little bit of actually let's start with roll call. Josh Merrill with Town of Chapel Hill. I'll jump to Ashley.
Ashley Wingby, City of Mebane.
Caroline.
Caroline Dwyer, Chapel Hill Transit.
Stephanie.
Stephanie Trueblad with Town of Hillsborough.
Becca.
Becca Eversole Robinson, alternate for Carborough because Tina just hopped on.
Oh, perfect. A check on triangle side. Logan.
Hi everyone, Logan, go Triangle.
Meg.
Meg Scully, go Triangle.
Sarah.
Sarah Williamson, Orange County Transportation.
Jamel.
Jamel Wiley, Orange County.
Doug.
Doug Plachinsky, Triangle West.
Madeline.
Madeline Galliano, Triangle West.
All right, I believe those are the voting representatives for today. Just a quick thing on the adjustments to the agenda. I believe that this agenda technically did not meet our 3-day notice requirement. For procedural sake, I'd like to make an adjustment to the agenda to make sure that we are all comfortable discussing the materials that we received last Friday on the fiscal year 27 annual work plan.
Josh, the only thing I sent was I added the agenda, but the annual work program I sent out a week before the meeting.
Yes, I agree. It got to all of us in time. I feel plenty comfortable with the materials.
Okay.
Just out of technical procedure, just want to make sure we all feel comfortable discussing it. Do you have any? I'll make the motion if there are any seconds.
Second.
All right, second. Motion by Josh, seconded by Meg. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll go to a roll call vote. Ashley? Caroline?
Aye.
Stephanie?
Aye.
Let me just make sure. Okay. Tina?
Sorry, aye.
Logan?
Aye.
Meg?
Yes.
Sarah? Sorry, Sarah? Am I having audio issues? Or
No, I'm not hearing anything.
Okay. Jamel?
No.
Doug?
Aye.
Madeline?
Aye.
One last call, Sarah, if you're able. Okay. I believe that then passes on a 9-1 vote to continue forward on the discussion. So, do we have any members of the public who would like to comment? Hearing none, I think we can move to our discussion of the fiscal year 27 annual work program.
So if you don't mind, Josh, can I say something? So I know that people might have comments and want to give me feedback. What Stephen did was he sent me a PDF, and Stephen, I did make those corrections, and I'll send it back to you with what I made. You can send it to me that way for anything that you see that needs to be corrected for your project sheets.
All right. And I think I'll just frame the discussion. I think today's discussion is to talk about the fiscal year work plan, talk about the projects that are in it. The way I'd suggest that we structure it is that members first make comments on their own sponsored projects to see if there are any things that they want changed in the final worksheet plans and all of that. All of this is aimed at getting a final work plan that we are ready to get out to the public at our January 21st meeting. So I think that's the end result that we're working for here. Once we've made comments on project sponsors' own programs, I think we can move to comments on other projects that are not by the project sponsor. Does anyone have any objections with that route? Meg?
Josh, it's Meg. I have my hand up. I'll just, so I don't have objections to that. That sounds good. I'm just, so we have, there, I guess there's a couple of different things going on. Are we going to refer to just the table that's on like 10, I think page 10 with the color coding? Are we just supposed to be going through new project sheets that were submitted? And like there's, in my opinion, so Darlene, I think there's going to be a number of typos and like minor edits and things like that, that I know I have prepared to send back to you in whatever format you like, but then there may be more substantive. I know like we had a typo in one of our project sheets that was submitted, but there's, it appears that however they were transcribed, there are a fairly significant number of typos or just mistranscribed information. So I think as we all submit our comments in whatever form you want them, I think it would be extremely helpful to get back a red line version or some way of knowing like that these things were addressed. So there's, I guess I have two different things out there. One, can we just have a little bit more conversation about how comments are to be submitted and then how we'll see them back? And then can we confirm exactly which project sheets we're supposed to talk about as we talk about them as a project sponsor?
Sure. I think, Darlene, if you want to speak to how you prefer to get comments, I know you noted the wanting some written ones over just discussion, but.
Yes, so for comments, and I will say this, the comments that are in the project sheets, I didn't change any of the sponsors' comments. I took from what you had and copied and pasted, right? So for the PDF, if you see things that need to be corrected, if you can send it back to me for the corrections in the PDF, and then I will send out an updated version of everything. I've already updated the ones that Steve gave me. I just have to send it back to him.
Well, so that's what I'm getting at. It's like I would recommend doing it as a whole revision and not just send back Steve's revisions to
Okay.
Steve. And so I would, you know, give us a date by which you want all the written comments and then you can address them all. But we still, in order to see that those comments were addressed, rather than us having to go back and like work through our comments back to a document, like, can you do a red line change so that we can readily see the change?
Okay.
Okay.
That can be
seems
harder to do in a PDF, but I think Darlene can you work on trying to find something that's meets Meg's goal?
I can try.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like Meg, your interest is in having different changes shared out with the full group and not just with the person who sent those edits back. Maybe the solution is to have it in our SharePoint, just so folks do have access to it. But yeah, I think there's different ways to get to that interest. I'm sure Darlene can handle and communicate out to the group.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Darlene.
Caroline?
Yes, I also have a process question. So, and just kind of adding on to what Meg has already said, which I agree with, I would also like to be able to track the changes more easily. And I do recommend that we receive one final revised copy versus multiple, iterations of changes. But I would like to know, in addition to when comments and revisions are needed, I would like to know when in advance of the meeting we will receive the revised draft, so that we know when we will need to review that before the meeting.
So the next meeting, our meeting is on the 21st, our next full meeting. So a week before that, let me see what the date is. I think it's Wednesday. This Wednesday coming.
So that would be then the 14th. That's not a whole lot of time. That's like 3.5 work days. Does that give you enough time? I don't think it does. There's fairly significant revisions that I've seen just in my draft, and I haven't even finished going through it. And I know others may have similar requests, so we may need to address that.
Well, I only put in what you had on your previous sheets. So
How about if
Well,
Darlene
I
sends out
know,
a
I hear
timeline
what
after she sees?
I'm still talking,
coming in.
Sarah. Sorry. I understand that, Darlene, but there are some mistakes that I went back and checked my own project sheets that were submitted, and they do not match what is in the PDF. So there definitely are, unfortunately, some instances where it looks like maybe just some transcription errors might have been made.
okay. And I don't mind correcting them.
I will say, I think the staff working group bylaws require an agenda at the absolute latest by Friday if we want to have this item on the January 21st agenda. I don't know if that would be enough time or if we do need to potentially push this item back at the January 21st meeting. I think that's something that we will need to discuss today and make sure that we feel comfortable with the timeline there. Tina?
Thanks. And thanks for having this special meeting today. I have kind of an observation that I'd just like to share that might help with the project sheets, as well as kind of a suggestion. The observation that I've experienced, and maybe this is just for capital projects, but the template self-populates a little bit. So I have found that after spending a lot of time to put in exact numbers, after I've submitted it and I go back, the number at the very top, which is perhaps the number that Darlene is using for the tables, has changed. So I'm wondering if it might be a useful 5-minute discussion for Darlene to share with us when she's programming in the numbers for the kind of the consolidated tables, which is the actual box that she's using, because that if there is any kind of adjustments that are happening automatically through the template, we can at least make sure that that particular box has the correct number, so that when we have the larger tables, we're not going back constantly and tweaking with the template. And over time, that may be a place that we can improve the process by working on the template a little bit off peak, so to speak. My other thought is, I know for Carborough, because one of our items is to request a budget transfer, and that amount may be being inadvertently double counted through this process. So maybe talking, either kind of going through and talking about the projects a little bit, and then maybe shifting to the revenue projections, because if it looks like what we're working on so far is if our totals for next year are way too high, then before we spend a lot of time getting the numbers together, it might be useful for us to go back to our respective groups and say, is there something that we want to bump out or just move for this for FY27, so that we're using our time wisely for the next meeting. I know that Carborough's already identified 2 projects that, if needed, we could bump out a year or 2 to help kind of stabilize the ship, so to speak, for the next fiscal year, and others may have similar thoughts. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that suggestion. I think that would be helpful for folks to note, I think especially on projects of their own, as we're going through, asking folks to comment on their own project sheets, on which projects they would suggest moving into a further year. And then I think we can potentially discuss that as we discuss the plan as a whole. I think the thing that's going to color the discussion of a plan as a whole is definitely the deficit that we're facing. And I'll also just note that we did need to, in a conservative approach, we've included the projects that have not yet been approved in the Q2 and Q3 amendments. So there is likely to be some double counting just because of those projects there that for a conservative estimate, we want to make sure that we include in our budgeting.
Yeah, I'm raising my hand. If we're going to be getting changes, and any of those changes are scope or dollar amounts between now and the monthly meeting, it's not just updating the project sheets, is it? We have to present, or I feel we're compelled to present for public comment, a slate of work program, operation and capital improvements and, transit plan implementation improvements that balance. So it's not just getting the information to put on the agenda for discussion. It's, can the tax district also process that to show us the numbers before the meeting within the agenda packet?
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think the absolute guarantee is that fiscal year 27 needs to show a balance. I think as we discuss which projects should and shouldn't go out for public comment, that may be the appropriate time to discuss which projects we release to release a document that is fiscally balanced, which I think is currently scheduled for the January 21st meeting, but it sounds like we've had some discussion on that not being a realistic timeline.
I mean, I think it's not only balancing for the annual work program, but the projections have to comply with our financial policies.
Stephen?
Yeah, Doug kind of hit it on the head. Since this is a 2040 plan, we have to make sure that every year between 2027 and 2040 have a positive fund balance. So we can't do where we have 13 million of revenue this year, as long as we guarantee there's 13 million revenue. Yeah, I'm sorry, 13 million in expenses. We need to make sure that even FY39 has at least $1. So we have to solve for, to Doug's point, the whole next 13, 14 years before it goes out for public comment.
I mean, Stephen, I'm assuming your CFO can't sign off on the budget ordinance without confirming that.
Yeah, I would actually think it would be in violation for any governing board to sign off on that. They'd be in violation of the financial policy. So I wouldn't even worry about the CFO. I would just think nobody would want to put their boards at risk for break-in financial policy.
Right, but your CFO controls this process, so we can't present anything to a board that CFO hasn't signed off on.
She doesn't sign off on the budget ordinance. That's the Go Triangle chair. So, but I don't, to your point though, I don't think anything would be presented for that.
Would something be presented to the Go Triangle chair without the CFO certifying that it meets the provisions required from the LGC?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is, the CFO is going to recommend to the board that this is a work program. It's really up to the boards to say that they're fine with it. And again, they would have to validate that it meets on the financial policy. The CFO is not going to sign off on the ordinance. And they actually, I think most of the time, it's actually to the board is to consider approving the Durham Transit or the Orange Transit or the Wake Transit plan. So
your CFO does not sign off that these are compliant before they're presented? I'm like, really
I don't know. I could speak to the CFO on that. I just don't have an answer on that, honestly.
Well, we definitely don't want your organization or your CFO, whatever it ends up being individually, and I would assume that it would be the CFO that would have to certify that to be put in a spot where it potentially might not.
Yeah, either way, we wind up validating that it is we'll go to the governing boards. It's the financial policy is pretty clear, as I guess everybody's going to review it. It needs to meet a couple of metrics. We show that it meets those metrics, and then we bring it to the governing boards. But to your point, even presenting to the public something that doesn't meet the financial policy is bad optics. It just kind of shows that the staff working group is not doing what they should be doing, honestly.
Now, if we would like to present the projects as options for the work program and then for public comment, and we bring that comment back and devise a financially compliant work program, I think that's acceptable, but we can't present all of, the total wish list of projects as something we can do.
Yeah, so I'll leave that up to you all. It's a draft. Nobody's voting on it. Staff work group is recommending putting something out. Theoretically, it's not going to any voting entity. So, I mean, theoretically, I would just be very clear and transparent to the public that you're overcharging X amount of $1 million, but there is no mechanism to stop a quote unquote draft plan, even if it doesn't reconcile going out. I mean, there's no law to do that. It's when it becomes, recommended to the actual governing board. And assuming it goes to the Orange County board first, they would be put into a predicament of voting on something that basically doesn't meet financial policy. But I guess I don't believe there's anything. I'm not a lawyer. That's something we could ask, but I don't believe there's anything that from the staff working group that says, I would just, for transparent reason, be very clear that this does not meet the financial policy. I would put that in big letters, but here's a whole bunch of stuff. Look at it. I mean, I would defer that to the group. If we want a legal opinion, I'm sure we could find out. But, we're not really, you guys are not actually asking for an actual vote by the governing boards for whatever you're putting out.
No,
Actually, I would leave that to Orange County to actually, I would actually leave that to them to validate that they're in charge of the process.
Right. I think we could construct public input to provide direction to the staff working group on its recommendations, but we need to acknowledge that the proposed projects are not financially compliant as a whole. Thank you. Sorry to jump in front of y'all.
Caroline, followed by Sarah.
Thanks, Josh. Yes. So just again, adding on to that conversation, I agree with what's been said. I have concerns about putting something out to the public that we can't follow through on. I think it's really important to be able to differentiate between what's been modeled in the past, what was included in the adopted transit plan, because all of that to that point is is fiscally it keeps us solvent basically. And I would really like to better understand both potential availability of funding, which I don't really have a good idea of, and then also the dollar amount of new or increases that we're considering, so that we sort of understand the universe that we have to work with in terms of potential additional funding that isn't already allocated to adopted projects, plus what the requests are. Because I just feel like right now I'm not really sure like what the playing field looks like. So I think it would be helpful, and I don't know, Stephen, if that falls into your bucket, but just understanding, where we left off after last year's adopted plan, what's already included in the adopted transit plan that's been modeled, and then what we have left over to work with.
Sarah, followed by Meg.
I don't have any problem putting out projects to the public to give input on that are being considered for us to potentially fund, as long as we word that carefully and appropriately. I think that we could get some valuable feedback that way, instead of this is exactly what we're planning to do. I think that everybody's done that at different times on different projects, getting input on different options and hearing from the public. And I think that could be a good opportunity for us to engage with the public differently than we have in the past, especially considering the lack of feedback that we sometimes get.
Meg?
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I agree very strongly with Caroline. Like, there's a difference between what's already been modeled and programmed and then these new requests. And, we have a plan, and the plan went through extensive public input. many revisions, many months, if not years, spent on developing it. So I do think we should just maybe get started on review of projects. But we do need to understand the finances. Like, what are we talking about? How much money does the model have currently available? And I think we do need to be assessing those new requests in light of that. Because it's not like we're not starting from anywhere. We know what we have programmed. We know what we have modeled already. This is something new. And then, we do have to talk about what would warrant amendment to the plan if we did do some additional projects. So I think there's differences.
Jamil?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna raise a concern. And I know that we're talking about the finances and we're talking about the deficit, right? That we may be in. My concern is, as we're presenting projects, are we continuing to, I'll just say, like, are we continuing to approve projects when we don't have any mechanism that is showing, or that's showing accountability or movement on existing projects that are already out there?
All right. I think sounds like we're kind of at two different routes that I think do really impact the schedule of this work plan. I think we can try to release a financially constrained plan for public comment, or we can try to recommend a financially constrained plan for the Orange County Board of Commissioners, Go Triangle Board. I think that really does change at what point we need to make serious discussions about these cuts and what work needs to go into that plan ahead of time. While this meeting is not scheduled to have any votes, I think it'd be helpful to get a sense of the group, given that we do have this on our January 21st agenda. If a majority would be supportive of getting the financially constrained version of the fiscal year 27 work program before releasing for public comment. I don't think there's a realistic timeline to do that at the January meeting. If a majority of the group feels okay releasing the list of potential projects and then coming with a financially constrained plan, we may be able to do that at the January meeting, as we're scheduled to vote on the final work program in March. Meg?
I feel strongly that we need to put out that we need to bring to the public something that's realistic. I don't think we've ever pitched program. That's okay. I don't think we've ever pitched the development of an annual program.
No, sorry, Meg. Before we jump in, I think I do want to, if we're going to jump into that topic, I want to go around the room rather than just, I want to see if there's anything else. Are there any other concerns about that approach? Just getting a straw poll. I think ultimately we will need to hold a vote at the January 21st meeting on whether we want to keep the work plan released for public comment on the agenda. So that will be the formal vote. I think this is an opportunity to gain a sense of what the group wants to do so that the staff working group administrator and the tax district have a better sense of the timelines that they have to work on this and what needs to be produced out of it. I will just, I guess, I don't want to go necessarily roll call. Now I'd invite Meg if you have comments on that approach.
Sure, Josh. So I think we definitely have to release a near fiscally constrained. Maybe if we can't get quite close enough and there's a little bit of tweaking that can be done, but I don't think we can go in with an explosion of the budget. And I know I would not feel comfortable doing that, recommending that go out to the public. I think it has to be reasonable. We've never suggested that we're just going out with a wish list to the public and then later on maybe we'll go ahead and fit it into a budget. I don't ever remember that being a thing. But I also think even before that, we need, as staff here, we need to be looking at these project sheets and discussing them, understanding them. I have a lot of questions on some of the project sheets and doing a staff level evaluation of them. Like, do we think they are good projects? Like even before we get to that, and then maybe where are we after that? And then start thinking about, cutting things or prioritizing things in order to release a generally balanced recommendation.
Thanks. Caroline, followed by Jamel.
Yes, I have two thoughts. I would not say that I'm fundamentally opposed to putting out options. However, one thing that I think is really important is that in the multi-year vision plan from 2022, we did make a commitment, should funding become available, that we would revisit the list of unfunded priority projects that are in that plan that were adopted by reference. And I do think that if we are putting options out, that those certainly need to be included or at least considered, because those were identified as priorities by the public in prior rounds of engagement, but we didn't have funding available in the model as it existed in that point in time. The other thing that I would like to know is, if we are putting this out to gather feedback on these options, is what is the plan for engaging the community, and who is facilitating that, and what does that look like? I would want to know that before voting one way or the other. Thanks.
Sure. Jamel.
Yeah, so thanks, Josh. So Meg brought up the project sheets, which I'm kind of in agreement on, because so from my review of the full project sheets, right? And maybe it's not the project sheets, maybe it's another document that I'm thinking of. There are clear, like there's an area for milestones, right? And I think that when, like Meg said, when we're reviewing these projects, we need to make sure that we're completing the project sheets or whatever the document that I'm thinking of is, and we're actually detailing it out. We're putting the milestones on there. That way, before we are, and I'm circling back to something I just said, before we're requesting new money, we are actually showing progress on existing projects. This is not anything that's like outside of the norm, right? If we're grant funded through FTA and NCDOT, those are all requirements. I don't see why we are not doing the same thing with our transit tax district money. And I think that that is an area for discussion that we need to start talking about.
Yeah, I'll just note back what I've heard. I've heard Caroline highlight the need to discuss if projects really are in the transit plan, whether as funded projects or unfunded priorities, before discussing new projects. And then I've heard Jamel highlight the need to evaluate previous performance on projects before evaluating new projects. Meg?
Yeah, I'll second what Jamal said. Like, I think there's a lot of value in evaluating what the public have received for the projects that have previously been spent and implemented. So what is the efficiency, the effectiveness, the impact of what we're doing for the residents and visitors of Orange County?
Okay. I think hearing these two interests and hearing a little bit on the before and after, I think one thing I'll put a pin in is that we can talk about how we would want to get to those evaluations as well, because currently I don't think we have a great framework to point to on how we do that. Doug?
Thank you, Josh. I'd also like to mention it, and I'm not trying to like over-explain it, but if we get to a point where we're reluctant to balance our work and our finances based on removing entire project costs. We have all agreed, and we've all put proposed funding on projects we think are worthwhile and valuable. At the risk of removing something completely, I think the idea of releasing funds or programming funds as phases are complete, as proposed by the project sponsors, will actually allow us to keep a broader set of priorities in motion. And I will trust that the staff and the elected officials will understand that we're making hard choices, and we are trying to prioritize without stopping something completely. That if there is an important project, work will continue. But it may be, we've got to acquire the property first, which means we've got to go through NEPA first. If it's going to use federal funding, or, we're not going to really know how much a building is until it completes design. Or there may be fluctuations in vehicle procurement as, negotiated shared purchase agreements come up for renewal, that kind of thing. And, I think that will help us present, the very professional and difficult decisions we're going to make. Thank you.
All right. I do want to jump back to that idea of, do we want, I think, not looking for specific answers, but if voting members are willing to discuss their thoughts on whether we release a financially constrained plan before public comment or after public comment, I'd welcome any new feedback. I think I've in general heard Meg and Caroline in favor of holding the public comment period until we have a financially constrained plan.
Just to reiterate my point, I would say that I don't know that I'm necessarily against it. I just feel like if we are going to go down the path of the financially unconstrained version, that we need to be mindful of the commitments that we've made previously to revisit those projects. So I don't think I don't think that we are meeting that commitment we made if we don't do that.
Got that more clearly recorded. Do other folks have thoughts on that approach? I think that we'll have a formal vote in January 21st, but would love thoughts so we can set timelines on what we want to do. Sarah? Sarah?
I am hesitant to make any financial commitments without agreements in place for fiscal year 26 that we are in, or fiscal year 27, with those global agreements still outstanding. There are some things in those global agreements related to how we fund projects and just how we operate and work together. So I am hesitant to make any funding commitments of any type without those agreements in place.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on it? Okay. I'll say I'm generally in favor of setting up a financially constrained plan before public comment. I think that does push our timeline out a little bit longer, but I think it is probably the clearest way to communicate about the actual fiscal year 27 work program we do want to put out and execute on. I am not hearing a clear majority on either side. I think we will need to set realistic timelines for both our staff working group administrator and our tax district then. I don't think that gives us a clear answer on whether we can act on January, but I would ask for comment on whether these seem like realistic timelines to make these revisions from those two parties after we have comments from Doug and Jamel.
Yeah, I mentioned gauging which projects were most important. Not that that's what I'm in favor of. I think that with the two largest operators wanting to present a responsibly fiscally constrained plan, and this means we have to not only consider fiscal year 27, but also the 26 fiscal year and any proposed amendments to 26 as part of that. I appreciate them being willing to work on a fiscally constrained program for public presentation, and I think that that is wise. Thank you.
Jamel? Jamel, I see your hand's down. Do you want to?
Sorry, my mic was still on mute. I guess my question would be for the staff working group administrator and the tax district is if they do not, if we don't make a final decision on projects, are they actually able to, given any timeline, able to make an informed decision on the funding of projects?
So I guess I'll talk on the tax district side. Until we actually have updated information from that guides what changed in the MIOP of the CIP or what has changed in 27, there's nothing we could do. What I will say is we can model stuff, but when we feel like things are more or less finalized, we send out the models out to PFM, which is the financial advising firm that validates any major change on the modeling. So like the last one that showed the deficit, they pretty much rip it apart to make sure things are good on it. So I would need to make sure that that's lined up for them too. I can't speak to them. Usually they have a pretty good turnaround. But just that part, I would want to bake in at least maybe a week to make sure that they're able to do that. So we could probably turn the model around quick, but it's that oversight that they do that I want to make sure that we give them time because I can't control them. We just send it to them and their people look it apart. So I would need, I think TDA would need at least a minimum of a week, especially if it's major changes. If it's, one number, one project here, two projects there, that's not, we could give you kind of a unfinalized, but, obviously we want to go through that. But there's nothing for us to change unless we get guidance. I hope that helps your question.
Yeah, it does, Steve. I was thinking that I was really just looking for the confirmation. That was my thought process, but I was really just wanted to ask the question and get the confirmation.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Tina?
Yeah, this has been a great conversation, and I appreciate hearing everybody's thoughts and input. Because I think we're trying to get to the same place. What is starting to become a little bit frustrating is it feels like we're starting to have a bit of a circular conversation which is a continuation of our circular conversation at the last meeting, and I just don't want to see that continue. It might be helpful, at least for me, to hear, and maybe this is a question for Stephen and his team and as the tax district administrators. If the deficit, we can, and Carver and others can certainly look at their FY26 work plan projects as well as FY27. If the issue is pushing out longer, which it's starting to sound like maybe from Doug that it is, that is a different and broader conversation. And without having a sense of that from Stephen and his team, it's a little bit difficult to figure out how we're going to move forward. If for example, if we don't have a sense of that, it's difficult to figure out if we can in fact approve FY27 or even go to the public for public comment. If there's an interest of seeing progress on capital projects, the bulk of that occurs when construction occurs, the bulk of the use of money. If we are not able to make a decision, we're not able to spend that money, we're not able to advance that project. So we're kind of in a little bit of a circular track now, and I'm interested in trying to figure out, I think, as we all are, in how do we figure out a way to actually proceed, and whether, and I see Doug's got some thoughts on that. Great. To Stephen's thoughts, is there a way that we can, in theory, well, let me take a step back. Is the comment from Stephen about the projections suggesting that we are not fiscally sound now for FY26? Or how do we, are we able to float FY26 and 27 with maybe some adjustments and then figure out how FY28 and on will work? We just have to come to some point where we're able to move forward, and I'm not getting a sense that we're quite there yet.
Thank you. Tina, I'm gonna not presume, but guess that I believe you have a project with a very specific timeline coming up that engages some transit plan funding. And I would encourage us to put our heads together and identify those projects with, as you mentioned, a very tight definite timeline that will lose leverage of other funds if they don't start. And I think that should be a very high priority that doesn't get lost in the weeds of this larger discussion. Does that sound about right?
Thanks, Doug. Yeah, that's part of it, I think, and we can have the larger conversation in another day, but I think there's a little bit of a fundamental difference, I think, from the way that we budget operating costs, where we might be able to say, by and large, you add an inflation rate or a general, gas rate change, and you can project out with, for capital projects, costs kind of come in waves. And it's difficult, at least for the smaller governments, to enter into agreements with contractors or design firms until you have to essentially front the money. And so that is the reason why it sometimes appears that groups are banking money, and it's not that. It's just that you have to show that you have all the money to enter into a contract, even if you're not really going to spend the bulk of it until a little bit farther down the process. It's just a fundamental different way of funding some things. And we can talk about that later, but yeah, certainly we have proposed, and we can talk about this later, a budget transfer that is budget neutral to advance the one project. And we are also happy as good partners to look at pushing out, some of our projects that would, if you look at the total for FY26 and 27, accumulatively approach maybe 500,000. So, we're looking and willing partners to do our share to help make the budget more solvent. But we need to have some path forward. Otherwise, all of our projects will come to a stop, not just the one that will be lost, but the others as they need to move forward. So coming up with some way of coming to some decisions, even if we have to leave some undecided matters for future conversations, I think is really important, not just for Carrboro, but for all of us. So, but thanks for those comments.
Yeah, I think that, at least as far as the work we do at Triangle West, we have seen in the past that funding requests come for 100% of the estimated project cost from soup to nuts. Or a project submitted with a guess without any sort of verification of the amount of money it's going to take to do the project. And then we have to essentially apply a funding award to a project without a defined timeline if they're banking for 100% of it, or the project sponsor is going to come back and say, well, we know we said it was going to cost this much, but it's actually going to cost that. And then we've got to understand the increase, and we've got to understand why, you know, there might be a scope change, or might be a, hey, we wanted to do that, but we're really not going to do that. We want to do this instead. I think we just need to all be more candid with each other as that happens, as organizations, that, you know, hey, we need this to happen, and we need to prioritize when we have those discussions ourselves, not for someone else, but, you know, what really is critical in this work program? What step are we taking in a project? You know, and I think that'll help us all work together a little better. Thank you.
Stephen, followed by Caroline.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of circle back to to Tina's comment. So, you know, moving, and I'm sure the team appreciates it, moving a capital project out just to a future year to be more mirroring a more realistic cost curve or time curve. That's great, but it doesn't help the problem because, you know, as Doug mentioned, at the end of the day, we're going up to 40. So moving something from 27 to even 35, if there's still a deficit, there'll still be a deficit. The big driver is kind of what I sent out in that email. If you look compared to how we ended last year to this year, just between, you know, 27 through 35, we've added 12.5 million in operating. That's a combination of, you know, increasing over that customary 2.5% you said. So, and adding new projects or moving new projects up. Very easy calculation. You could look at last year's final MyOp on SharePoint compared to this year's SharePoint, and you could see what projects are specifically driving that increase. And then there was also another increase of around 3.2 million of capital. So just, you know, between now and 35, just that's around 15-16 million dollars of new financing of projects that occurred. So that it kind of helps explain why that's the issue, right? So if we just kind of kept doing what we were doing, we would be fine. It's just we added that 12.5 million over the next 7-8 years and another 3.5 million.
Caroline?
Thanks, Josh. Stephen, I'm glad you actually brought that up because that was, Tina mentioned something about FY26 and making sure we had enough funding there. As you just mentioned, there have been increases, it sounds like both operating and capital. Can you be a little bit more specific about what that is? Because when I read the summary that's in this draft work program, you know, there's some suggestions in here, I would argue, that makes it sound like all of the FY27 capital and fund balance is being used for the North-South Bus Rapid Transit project, which is not actually true. We don't have any new capital for NSBRT in FY27 currently. And all of the existing funding that we have for that project was modeled in the 2022 multi-year vision plan, and that was a balanced budget over that, you know, period through 2040. So can you just dig into that a little bit more? Because I'm not quite clear on exactly, you know, and this is, I think, a global issue that I have with the way that we present this information, is that it's not always clear to me when we say new project, whether that's new but already adopted in the long range plan, or new, never even considered, brand new, or if it's revised, additional. I would love it if we could come up with a way to more transparently report that type of information. I think that would help our decision making too. Yeah,
so yeah, I don't know the whole NSBRT thing that you're talking about, but there was no, I didn't see anything new with the NSBRT. So I don't think that's obviously driving it because it worked last year. The majority is, like I said, if you look, it's people going over the 2.5%, you know, maybe cost per hour. I'm just making it could be attributable to anybody who runs a system. Maybe it was like $50. Now it's $70, where 2.5% of $50 is, $51 an hour or so. Or it could be like a staffing position that was, 100,000, now 120,000. But then there's also some newer projects that if somebody, I'm just gonna pick a Go Triangle, if they started around, I don't know, 9,000, and they added that, for 300,000 going for years over years. So that is what is driving. And to your point, I actually probably should check. I know Wake does, I think Durham does too. They do actually line up the adopted FY26 amounts for the public next to the 27 amounts. And I think they might even show the 28 amounts. So then the public really sees what is driving it on those tables. It shows that, this is what was adopted previously, this is what it is now, and this is what is anticipated next year. So that would also, I think, help alleviate, Orange doesn't do that, but that would help alleviate where it could pop out on the document. So if you see a number that's 27 and it got raised, I don't know, 200%, you're not going to remember that FY26 was 200% less. But if you actually see it lined up like that, you would be, I think actually Orange used to do that in the sheets that the county put together, those blue and yellow ones. But I guess it kind of got disappeared over the last couple of years. Did I help answer your question, Caroline, by the way? Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if I even answered it.
Yeah, no, I think so. I just, I think the thing for me is that I don't think we have a great way of differentiating what we are reflecting in these annual work plans that has gone through the public process, been vetted, been adopted by the 3 boards that's included in the long range transit plan, right? Which allocates 2 projects over that timeline through 2040. And then differentiating those that roll in a year, right? So like say FY27, maybe a project didn't receive funding until FY27, but is included in that long range adopted plan. So it has been vetted and gone through the process versus projects or revised amounts that are above and beyond what was included in that long range transit plan. We may need, I think we should identify a better way to evaluate and differentiate those projects that have not gone or that have not had the same level of scrutiny.
Meg, followed by Jamil.
Yes, so thanks. I agree that it would be very helpful to have those clearly illustrated, so you can see the 26, you can see what the new requests are, what hadn't previously been the case, what broke the 2.5% increase in operations, for example, which is a new request perhaps for capital that hadn't been in the plan earlier, hadn't been in unfunded priorities, like some way of really laying that out so we could see it. But can I put in a request for us to get to the project sheets, because we now have 1 hour left. I know I have to absolutely leave at noon when the meeting is scheduled to end, and I think it's just going to take a while. Thanks.
Yes, I think we can get to that after Jamel and Sarah. Jamel?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. So I'm just wondering if there's a way, and this is kind of touching on what Caroline and what Meg is saying, is there a way for under like the operations and administration summary? I'm just looking at the summary page, to put like a FY26 and then an FY27 funding request, kind of similar to the way that it's on the capital summary side. And then my second comment is, I think that kind of what part of the issue is that we're trying to do 2 things at once, right? We're trying to fix maybe past issues or concerns while at the same time trying to move funding forward for new items. And so I think that that's something that we're going to need to address, is like, how are we dealing with this, right? Are we putting the cart before the horse, or how are we resolving these issues?
Sarah, and then I think we'll move to project sheets. Sarah?
I want to go back to that you request previously for accountability and metrics. I think that we have to look at those things and understand those things about projects as we consider funding, knowing that we are in a deficit at this time. And I think that some of that deficit, we really have to consider looking at the previously approved projects that have not had action on them or are not meeting milestones. So I think that we need to review those as part of the discussion of what is in and what is out moving forward. And I think that we need to do that before we make any decisions about the current request as well, so that all of those projects are considered together.
Stephen, if there's any.
Yeah, and my one final thing, because I know Meg mentioned, I guess you guys want to go to projects. I apologize on my last comment, because I actually did, after Jamil made that comment. It does look like Darlene and team did actually include 26 lined up with 27. There's a couple of adjustments I recommended on it, more nomenclature, but actually if you do go, it's page 10 on the PDF. There is a line, a column that shows the 26 request, and then a column that shows the 27 requests, at least on the operating side. So you actually could just go there and you know, going back to Tina's comment, you could see like who has requested increase from, you know, 1 year over another year. And then the question is, it's not clear. I think this is where Meg may have been going with the yellow and blue. It's not clear if some is just like increase in service, or if it's increase in cost per hour, or if it's increase in staffing. It just shows an increase. So I just wanted to kind of give clarity on my comment earlier. So thanks.
All right, I think there are going to be a couple action items out of this discussion. Let's move to project sheets, and then I'll summarize the action items that it sounds like we need to take following this meeting. I think, as noted up top, I'd ask that project sponsors suggest any changes to their project sheets that they want to highlight or see. I'd also ask, before we get started, Darlene, if you could outline how best to make sure we get comments recorded and the deadline that we are thinking that's realistic.
Okay, so as you can, if you see corrections that need to be made, could you get those in the PDF for me? So if I can get all of the sheets, I would say by next Wednesday, I can work to have it out by Friday if I just focus on that for 2 days. Making all of the corrections. At the same time, working with Steve and Paul, I can try to get that out.
Thanks, Darlene. There's a second part to that issue. Is I have a lot of questions on the content of project sheets, like what do they actually mean? What's the backup for them? You know, that sort of thing. And so that wouldn't be on you, Darlene. That would be like, how do we go about getting answers to questions on the content of project sheets submitted by sponsors? For example, and we'll get to this eventually, but there's 2 Orange County sheets. I don't remember offhand. I have some notes here that I can refer to later as we get to them, but there's ISIS is mentioned in one of the project sheets, but it's not an ISIS project sheet. And then ISIS is increased in another project sheet above what's legally allowed, and then also what's allowed in the policy and current practice. So it's basically just like it's a request that we just cannot do unless we change law and currently approved policy. So like my question is more that was submitted by Orange County. So my question would be more like, how do we reconcile that issue? And is this can we even approve this type of project sheet when it's against our laws and policies? So that's very different from asking Darlene to make copy edit changes. So how do we address something like that?
Yeah, I think ultimately that That is the goal of this meeting, to have those conversations. Given the time constraints, we may want to use the January 21st meeting to continue that discussion. The more we discuss,
can
I
I-
think the less
can I
likely it
make
is.
another-
Mhm.
Can I make another suggestion, Josh?
Mhm.
Just a suggestion. Okay, so it seems like we need to do updates as far as administrative, but also people have questions for the other partners. So how about, just a suggestion, for the January 21st meeting, right? If everybody, all your administrative things, I would say that part. With all your administrative things, if you can get those to me by Wednesday, right? And then I can try to update them and have all the administration part corrected. Maybe at the January 21st meeting, after all of those has been sent out, you can actually go in and look and make sure all the administrative questions are done. And then that meeting would be more focused, I would say, potentially around continuing to ask some of the partners the questions that you might need to have clarification, because the public comment doesn't start to the 30th when it's supposed to go out. So that's why I'm making a suggestion. I don't know how y'all feel about that, if that makes sense. How does that sound? Any more ideas?
Yeah, I think that it makes sense to have those types of discussions at the January 21st meeting if we feel confident that we can have the administrative changes done by then. I think it makes sense to make those types of comments once everything administratively has been cleaned up and the answer isn't, oh, that's something that just got misprinted, or I can fix that type of thing. I don't know if that will be the January 21st meeting at this time. Darlene, I appreciate the effort to try and get it there. I think it may be worth this group considering if it's realistic to do it at the January meeting, or if we all need to plan around a different timeline than the one we adopted last year. Jamel, followed by Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. I wanted to address two things. So with the edits, I wanted to make sure that we are sharing the edits with the group, right? I think that there was a topic of
Yes.
discussion of making sure that the edits were shared with the group. That way everybody had access to them. The second thing that I wanted to address was Meg's comment about the project sheets, right? And I think this goes back to what the comment that I made earlier and what Sarah was talking about earlier. Part of the problem is that we're trying to fix two things at the same time. We're trying to fix issues that happened in the past, especially, and I won't go into them, at the same time trying to approve projects moving forward. I think that what we need to do is take a pause and stop trying to put the cart before the horse. We need to fix the issues of that concern funding from the past and how we calculate that funding before we move forward with anything new, because we're never going to get to where things are like correct or like they're equitable or equal until we fix everything that is currently not correct.
All right, Sarah, followed by Caroline.
I am wanted to thank Meg for bringing up questions about project sheets, because those exemplify why we need to have our agreements in place for the fiscal year, current and future fiscal years, before we discuss the projects. Those types of questions that use it as examples, Meg, are exactly why we need to work out our global agreements and have those in place before we can make financial obligations and decide what projects are going to be prioritized. So thank you, Meg, very much for bringing that up. I do want to be sure that we figure out what's happening with the open projects right now. And I think that as Jamal was saying, we need to deal with that at the same time or before we consider new projects.
Caroline, followed by Tina.
Yes. Two things. The first is I am a little unclear on the conversation surrounding like existing, old, open funding projects, things like that. So I could use some clarification to better understand what the perceived issue is. And then the other thing that I will mention is that Chapel Hill, the town of Chapel Hill, we've already executed our global agreement. So I don't think that our funding should necessarily be held up because other parties are unable to execute agreements. So I think we probably need to figure something out to manage that as well.
Tina?
Sure. I'd just like to piggyback on some of what Caroline said. You know, we have projects that have been approved through 2 transit plans, through large public input processes, and the town has made financial commitments to the community based on those plans and based on agreements that have been adopted. And so the notion that we would, as a subcommittee of staff, decide that some projects should now be removed in place for other projects that have not been vetted or approved in a transit plan is very troublesome to me, as well as the notion that projects would be removed when the different jurisdictions have made fiscal commitments based on those approvals. So that to me feels like a very worrisome situation. Now, certainly to me, one of the benefits of the transit plan funding has been the fact that it has more flexibility than the federal funding. And so that has given us an opportunity when the projections and the revenues have allowed us to add funding to do so. If we are now reaching a fiscal situation or the economy is going in a different direction, and that's something that we are no longer able to do, then fine. That should be a group decision based on the recommendations from the tax district administrator that we have reached a new era in revenues that we should hold adding new funds to projects or adding new projects. And I think that that's a conversation that we have had on and off over the years. You know, what do we do when revenues allow for new projects? What do we do when revenues are short? And we can't allow for new projects. But I think the understanding has always been that once an agreement is in place, that those or simply the purpose of those agreements has been in large part to guarantee that that funding is in place. And so I think we will be jeopardizing the whole purpose of this group if we approve funding for projects 1 year and then we subsequently decide to pull that money out. I think that's just a very problematic way of doing business. I know in Carrboro, we are sitting here poised to advance an agreement because we're not sure what money to put into it. And that relates to how we decide to move forward with other projects. So as much as I want transparency and want to make decisions, we are again having a circular conversation about how to proceed in any way, and we're holding everything hostage. And I do think, while I respect the interest of some of the parties who have not had a lot of projects in the past to get their projects in, I think we need to figure out how best to do that. I don't think it's a good scenario to say, well, we're gonna pull a lot of projects in order to open up a window to add new projects that may not have been in the approved plans. It just feels very problematic to me in terms of the process that we've used so far. So, figuring out how those projections apply. We've often talked about the need to set aside a reserve so that if revenues dip, we have a way to honor the commitments that we've already made, I think we should continue to proceed under that understanding. So.
Meg?
Tina, I agree with you, and I hope that anything I'm saying is not implying that I'm interested in looking back at projects that were approved by our governing bodies and are progressing through their, often lengthy development process. We all get that, those of us who do that. So anything I said, that's not what I was getting at. I think what I'm getting at is understanding, like, for example, in operating projects, if we're looking at operating projects for that in 27 are requesting significant increases over what's been funded in the past, looking at what did we get and what are we getting for those operating projects now. So, we're seeing huge increases in requests for that, but the impact to the communities has been extremely minor. There's been very little use of some of those services. There's been reductions in services. There's been, incredibly significant outlying growth in operating costs. And so that's the kind of evaluation I'm talking about. I'm not talking about capital projects per se. I think they have a life of their own. And simply because of the long time frame that's involved. And I think operating is separate from capital when I think about some of those things. Not that we shouldn't be evaluating closely and making sure projects are progressing, but we always say, like, we have a pretty significant bus stop program, and if you just looked at the dollars spent in year one, you would think nothing was going on. Well, it takes 2 to 4 years to build a bus stop that has federal funding tied to it, which we also try to get for our projects. And so, for a couple of years, everybody's working really hard and it looks like nothing's happening because no money's being drawn down. But then all of a sudden, boom, you want to draw it all down when you go to construction. So I get that. And that was not my intent, was to put concern into those agencies who have outstanding capital projects.
Jamel, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah, so since it was brought up, I'm just gonna go ahead on and put it out there. And this is kind of to address Carolyn's question and some of the comments made by Meg, right? So if we want to talk about where we're at and putting the cart before the horse, right? Let's just put it out there. Repeatedly, we have requested a conversation on cost per hour. It has still not happened, right? And so when we go into the project sheets, we put in what our cost per hour is, okay? And so if that's creating an issue, like I said before, we need to fix the issue with having the conversation and making a final decision on the cost per hour. I think what we're trying to get to is especially with the operating, we're trying to make sure that everybody is maybe not made 100% whole, but close to it. And if we keep pushing these conversations back further and further and further as we try to move forward with new projects, nothing ever gets resolved. And I think this is going directly to what Tina was saying, where we keep having these circular discussions where we're not getting anywhere. We have to fix one thing because it affects the next thing. So I think we need to fix the conversation on cost per hour and some of those other outlying issues before we try to move forward with anything new. And I don't think that, Tina, just to touch on your point, I don't think that we're trying to say that we want to take anything out, but if we're going to be fiscally responsible and we need to start fixing some of the, like, I'll say some of maybe the smaller things before we start moving into the big things. And I think that's what keeps us going back and forth in these circular discussions.
All right. I do want to highlight that we are getting closer to the end of the meeting. If there are any particular comments that people want to make on one of their project sheets, please do so now. Otherwise, I think Darlene has outlined that she would appreciate comments in the PDF by Wednesday for any changes that you may have on the annual work program.
There's just
Josh,
one
can you
other-
just clarify what you're looking for specifically?
I mostly want to highlight if there's any major concerns that people want to note that people think will significantly impact the end result of the plan. If there's significant increases or things that you feel like weren't carried over accurately.
On our own sheets.
On your own sheets for now.
Okay. Ours, I think, are okay. There's minor edits that need to be made that were, just transcriptions, and we had one word that we need to change.
Sarah, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, there had was some conversation earlier. I know there's been lots of conversation today, but there was some mention earlier about changing public engagement and doing more to engage the public. And we had a very small request to support that. That has come up several times this year. So I hope that you all saw that. But if there are questions about that, we are certainly glad to get those back. But that was in response to this group's request.
All right, I'll give one last call for any specific comments on specific projects in the work plan. Hearing none, please get your comments to Darlene by Wednesday in the form of comments on the PDF document. I think, Darlene, if you could be in touch about how we want to share out the changes that are being made to the group, and then that final version.
Okay, I will.
All right. Let's recap what we've kind of discussed and talk about some next steps moving forward. I think we have Meg, did you have a?
Yeah, Josh, I have a lot of questions on some of the content of the project sheet submitted that I think if we could discuss that sort of thing in the next half hour, I think that would be helpful, because otherwise this all gets started in a few weeks rather than now, because some of those could just be clarified by project sponsors for the next meeting, perhaps.
Okay. I do want to get a recap of what our to-dos are out of the conversations that we've had, and then I think we can jump into that. I think I've heard interest in how we evaluate past performance. I've heard interest in how we evaluate the compliance with the transit plan with projects. I've heard interest in making sure that we address the global agreements, the amendments, and no, I think those were the two that need to be addressed before proceeding with the fiscal year 27 plan. I've heard interest in phase funding instead of releasing dollars all at once. I think particularly aimed at capital plans. I've heard interest in, I've heard conflicting kind of interest in whether we should go back and evaluate previous projects versus evaluating new projects in the context of how they compare against previous projects. And I think one thing that I've walked away with is that we do need to fully evaluate the multi-year plan. This is not just about the fiscal year 27 outcomes. Even though that is the end goal of this plan, the multi-year needs to be in a fiscally balanced state before we can proceed, which will impact what types of projects we may be looking at, not for fiscal year 27, but looking forward and beyond it. Jamel, followed by Caroline.
Yeah, Josh, can you add to that we finally resolved the cost per hour conversation, please?
Okay, that's the other thing. Global agreements, fiscal year 26 amendments, and the cost per hour conversation are all things that folks have expressed an interest in resolving before proceeding with the fiscal year 27 plan. Caroline?
I just have a clarifying question. I don't feel like I've gotten an answer, and I've asked this a couple times in a few different ways, so maybe it is me. But I've heard, resolving the FY26 plan, making sure there's enough money. Is there a concern that there is not enough money, like as of right now with everything that's programmed? I don't know that I feel like that's been communicated.
I defer to Stephen. I think from the email, the answer is no, that
Well,
we do.
so yeah, thank you, Josh. I appreciate that. And Caroline, I don't know if your message was conveyed for me, but what I would say is based on the final MIOP and CIP that was adopted last year, there is more than enough money. I think it comes out to a $2.5 million fund excess liquidity, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
It's just that between when it got adopted last year, let's call it June 28th to January 9th, the partners have added in a total of 16 million new projects. So just think about the math, right? Like we started 3 million positive. We added
what
all
were
that
those?
in. Well, so if you compare last year's MIOP to this
You
year's
mean for the
I'm talking about,
27
no,
work
I'm not
plan.
talking about 27 at all. Let's
Yeah.
just 26, because I keep hearing that we need to resolve 26 before we talk about 27. I don't know what that means, because I'm not under the impression that there's an issue at 26.
I concur. I'm not it sounds like, and I don't want to put words in Sarah's, it sounds like there are issues with the agreements. So at least with 26.
But that's not a funding issue.
Yeah,
that's
I
not
don't know
like
what the
an
funding.
issue of not
There
having
is no
enough money.
There is no funding issue with what
Okay.
was currently approved. It's what people are asking for this year.
Am I missing something? Like, can we clarify what this conversation?
Without global agreements in place, funding cannot be provided to agencies. Those global agreements authorize that funding. And there's also clauses in our global agreements about which types of projects can be funded.
Okay, but that still doesn't tell me anything about the comment that there's something wrong or out of balance with the FY26 model as it stands.
Yeah, that is an incorrect. That's an incorrect statement. If someone said
You're
that.
saying there's enough. We had an excess of 2.5 million.
Yes.
Okay, so
if we just took
there's no
26's
need to
model,
resolve anything from that point, right? We're just looking at FY27 moving forward. So nothing happened between, when that plan was approved this time last year through today that is impacting that plan in a negative way.
Well, so let me, and I don't want to, dither a little. One thing I will say is revenues in the previous model might have been a little higher for 27 and beyond than now, but we didn't model that. We didn't do a quote unquote status quo model, which would basically say, assuming nothing got passed and we just raised everything 2.5%, we did not do that. Like we didn't do, lack of a better term, an interim budget kind of scenario. We did not run that. I would assume that would still fit, but I did not run that because the revenues, if you remember, revenues this year did come in, I believe, a million or so.
Okay.
Oh no, maybe like a couple 100,000 less than we thought. So
okay, but we're still, if we had 2.5 billion in liquidity,
we should be
then
fine.
that's still within that. Okay.
Yes.
Jamel, you mentioned that a couple of times. I'm just going to ask you directly. Is there something that what are you thinking of when you're talking about that?
So so on the project sheet, right, when you're talking about operating, there is a clear area that part of that is calculated by your cost per hour.
Yep.
Right? Okay. So if our cost per hour is not correct, well, I won't say that it's not correct. So because on multiple occasions, right, this is a recurring thing. This has happened probably every year. Where we submit, Orange County specifically, submits for what our actual cost per hour is, right?
Okay.
And then there is this repeated debate about, that's too much. And then what we end up doing is we, as Orange County, end up reducing it so that it works. No one else is doing that. No one else is doing that. And I think that what my concern and my issue is that until we resolve it, where our cost per hour is what it's supposed to be, we're going to keep having this conversation.
Okay. Okay.
And then it goes directly to the request that we
Understood.
put in for FY27.
Okay, so you're talking about reconciling your cost per hour so that it reflects what actually is the cost per hour, because what is currently allocated doesn't reflect the actual cost per hour.
It does not.
Okay, and I know that we've seen those sheets like several times, maybe at the end of the year, because unless I'm mistaken, there is an opportunity to do that reconciliation for the cost per hour. I think that is something that is
So we're
built
not,
into the plan.
so Carol, and so I'll defer this to Sarah, right? Because she may have more information on it. But from what I'm aware of, we're not asking for any old money. That's not what we're doing.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
We're saying for what we are evaluating for, let's say 27 and moving forward, we want to make sure that it's correct.
Yep, I'm with you. I have supported having a conversation about cost per hour as well. Like, I think it's important that we're all starting on, using the same things that go into that number, right? So, okay, that I think is helpful. And I think I understand your point.
And there is not an opportunity to correct that at the end of the year. We were pointed to correcting it and getting it fixed at the beginning of the year
Okay.
when we asked that question. So that is why it is in there now.
So
I'm gonna go
can I
back and
just,
double
so
check
this
that.
is the, this
That's
is the project
I'm just
sheet
telling you
that
what I was told.
Yeah, no, I believe you. I just want to make sure, because there was something in my mind that thought that was a possibility, but I'll see if I can find anything.
So can I just say, this is one of the project sheets that has really raised quite a bit of concern in my mind. And Jamal, I completely understand and respect what you're trying to do. But I don't think we can keep that project sheet in there until you all know what your cost per hour is. Because the calculations are so significantly larger now than they were.
And Meg, ask
when
that as your question in
So
the
my
questions
question
that are getting
is-
asked.
my
I don't think this
question
is the
is,
time for
how
those
did your
questions.
costs increase 500% from the start of the transit plan to now? Well, from 2019 to 2024, and the plan was done in the middle there at $90 per hour, and now you're asking for $160 per hour with a 500% operating expense increase. That is an unheard of percent increase, while at the same time you're providing fewer revenue hours to the public for the entire system, and you have lower ridership for the entire system. So the calculations are not logical that your expenses increase 500% since 2019. So I think we most certainly need some sort of a cost per hour workshop, because there is something tremendously askew. There's no other transit agency in our region, the 3 counties, that come anywhere near that increase in costs. Like, that's
Great.
unheard of.
If you will put those questions in writing, we will be glad to respond to them in the future. But the time for that is not today, because we're not doing everybody's questions. So I don't want to get into just one question for our agency. Thank you. Whatever's
I have a
next, we'll
lot
move
of
on.
questions. It's just that we didn't receive any guidance on how to provide them. So I'll put all of these in questions, because it's extremely concerning.
All right. I do think that gets to the challenge of asking questions of other project sponsors. It does feel like the best way to address that is to give prior heads up, so that folks have time to address it. I'll say I'm walking away from this meeting feeling like January 21st is not a realistic date to release this for public comment. It seems like our time on January 21st may be best used to address those questions. And that may be the preparation that we need ahead of that meeting, that folks have those questions for project sponsors. ahead of time, written and sent over.
And I
Tina?
can add those questions to the packet if you like.
Yes, I think if we can get those questions to the staff working group administrator, are we comfortable with a Friday agenda? I think that gives us a Wednesday deadline. If we need a Wednesday agenda, we have a very, very quick turnaround.
I'd personally rather take the time than rush it.
All right, let's plan on a Friday agenda, set a Wednesday deadline for questions for other project sponsor agencies. And that can go along with technical corrections to project sheets as well.
Will you repeat the plan, Josh, from here on out?
Sure. I think the immediate short-term plan by Wednesday, questions for other project agencies and technical corrections on project sheets should be sent to Darlene so that she can compile those for the agenda packet. Nina, apologies for getting skipped over.
Thanks. And my apologies for pushing what is a Carborough focused matter, but based on the conversation from Stephen that FY26 is solvent, I'm going to take the conclusion of this discussion that our information item for the budget transfer, we will proceed with that with no further delay because that's a revenue neutral change, and I will update our FY27 requests accordingly. So thank you.
Okay, that was the one question I had out of that information, is that will that lead to a change in your FY27 requests? And it sounds like it will.
Yeah, it will. And we included this. I think our general thinking in talking with the tax district staff and with the administrator was that this really didn't necessarily need to go before the staff committee, but in interest in transparency, we wanted to be transparent. So we have done that. This is revenue neutral. And we will, with this information, we will adjust our FY27 and we will complete the signature of our global agreement. So I'm crossing off two items with one statement. So thank you.
Caroline, followed by Stephen.
So just a thought on questions and answers. I wonder if it would be helpful to structure it like we would do for like a council meeting where, you know, the questions go to the person who can answer them after they're submitted and then they all get compiled as responses. Does that seem reasonable? Because I think there are going to be a lot of questions, and I do like the idea of people being able to take some time to, you know, find what information is needed to respond.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. If folks would like a longer timeline, the questions about the fiscal year 27 proposals, if we aren't voting on January 21st to release this for public comment, we can take more time on those. If that would be more beneficial for folks to provide written questions and get written answers back, I would be willing to do that if we are all in agreement that we're not putting this out for public comment on January 21st. Stephen?
Yeah, hey, just to avoid any kind of future concerns, my request is for Darlene to just make sure that in the minutes she reiterates what Tina just mentioned. So we have a documentation that validates that everybody was okay with the balance transfer.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Stephen. And just to follow up with Caroline's request, I think that's a great idea. You know, however we can get to the meat of the questions and have a simple conversation and move these things forward, I think that's great. I think sometimes it's been difficult to get to the root of the question for some of these projects. So however best we can, if the agencies come prepared with maybe a 1-page PowerPoint slide or whatever works best, I'm all for it.
Given that interest, I hate to raise it. Do we need another special meeting to have further conversations after written questions and responses, to have the conversation about these actual projects? I think we've had a lot of conversations about process and what needs to be done before we can proceed. It would be helpful for project sponsors to have a chance to discuss any questions that they've gotten, discuss any responses they have.
Yeah, so Josh, I'll answer your question. I think another special meeting is going to be necessary at some point, because if, if project sponsors are going to want to get into the weeds of what, of requests, then we're going to have, it's going to take more than just one meeting on the 21st. So,
Yeah. Okay, let's look for another Friday special meeting in late January. I'm looking at the 23rd and the 30th as potential to focus the conversation on questions from members of the staff working group to project sponsors. And I think that does give us a little bit more time for questions and response. If we set a special meeting on the 30th, I think it would be a reasonable expectation for folks to have questions into the staff working group administrator by the 16th and responses by the 23rd. Sarah?
I was going to just ask what that does to the timeline. I am not available either of those days as of right now.
Okay. Do we, in general, would folks be available on January 30th?
Yep, the 30th works, but it sounds like Sarah needs to be at the meeting if a lot of the questions are for Orange County. So to me, it seems like we need to start there. That's the only project sponsor I've heard raised as an example for needing more information.
Yeah, I definitely hear that interest. I know that we have typically held these special meetings on Fridays. I think we have struggled to find other times that work for staff members. Would we rather push beyond January 30th and maybe look in early February, or we would want to look at potentially our normal Wednesday time or another time that may work? I think ultimately we do have some level of we are going to deviate from the schedule somewhat. I do want to have this conversation ahead of the February 18th meeting to give us an opportunity to release this for public comment at the February 18th meeting. Not saying we'll get there, but let's see if we can. All right, I'll just jump Friday, February 6th. Are there any folks who could not make that meeting? Hearing none, I think I'll plan on calling a special meeting on Friday, February 6th. That gives us a bit of additional time. Questions on project sheets, if they could be submitted by Friday, January 23rd. If we could get those to project sponsors and have project sponsor responses by Friday, January 30th, that gives us time to prepare for the conversation on February 6th.
Thanks for facilitating, Josh. You did a really good job today.
And appreciate that. I think the thing I'm definitely taking out of this meeting, when it comes time to prepare the agenda for January 21st, I think it is unlikely that we include the release for public comment, unless folks would strongly want that on the agenda. Let's go ahead and prepare for that. All right. Any other topics of discussion, takeaways, and action items for folks? Hearing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.